What if the biggest threat to your freedom isn't a dictator or a surveillance state, but your own desire to fit in? What if the scariest part of society isn't the people in power, but the millions of ordinary people who follow them without question? Think about it. When was the last time you changed your opinion just because everyone around you disagreed? When did you nod along, not because you agreed, but because disagreement felt dangerous? We like to think we're independent thinkers, but every time we silence our doubts, laugh along with the crowd, or share what's trending without asking why, we give up a little piece of ourselves. This isn't just a quirk of human nature. It's a deeply wired survival instinct. And in today's world of algorithms and outrage, it's being weaponized against us. Let's talk about the psychology of mass conformity and why following the crowd might just be our most dangerous habit. Part 1. The ancient brain in a modern world. We like to imagine we're evolved beings, scrolling through smartphones with minds unshackled by primitive instincts. But the truth is, our psychology is old, really old. It's wired for survival, not truth. For tribes, not tweets. Our ancestors survived because they belonged. To be rejected by the group meant death, not metaphorical, literal. So your brain, in all its sophistication, still carries the echo of that ancient fear, the fear of standing alone. Imagine this. You're in a meeting, and someone says something everyone agrees with but you. Do you raise your hand? Do you question it? Or do you stay silent, telling yourself it's not worth the friction? That little hesitation? That's your ancient brain trying to keep you alive. Only now, the danger isn't a saber-toothed tiger. It's the side-eye from coworkers, the silent judgment, the social penalty. We don't fear being eaten anymore. We fear being unfollowed, unsubscribed, misunderstood. We crave belonging like oxygen, and that craving drives most of our behavior. It shapes how we speak, what we wear, what we share. That's why fashion trends spread like wildfire. Why political beliefs often match zip codes. Why entire friend groups echo the same opinions with eerie precision. Not because people are faking, but because they're adapting. It's not that you're not smart. It's that your survival instincts are stronger than your curiosity. And those instincts whisper, blend in. Don't question, don't stand out, because standing out used to mean dying alone in the wild. But here's the twist. Today, that very instinct might be the thing that's keeping you mentally trapped. We're not in the wild anymore, but our minds haven't evolved at the same pace as our tech. We live in cities, but think like villagers. We scroll past thousands of opinions a day, and we feel, subtly but surely, the pressure to align. That pressure is invisible, but it's heavy. It tells you what's acceptable, what's respectable, what's safe. Conformity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet nod, a retweet, a silence where there should have been a question. We conform because the discomfort of disagreement feels bigger than the discomfort of lying to ourselves. And every time we do, we lose a little bit of our intellectual autonomy, not in one big dramatic collapse, but through 1,000 tiny compromises. The tragedy is that conformity feels like peace, like belonging, like wisdom. But often, it's just fear with good branding. We think we're being polite, mature, reasonable, but sometimes we're just scared. And the system knows it. Marketers know it. Politicians know it. Algorithms know it. They don't need to control you if you're already too afraid to think freely. All they need to do is create enough noise, enough consensus, enough fear of isolation, and your ancient brain will do the rest. So before we dive deeper into experiments in modern media, just remember this. You're not weak. You're human. And being human means you were built to belong. But also, if you're paying attention, you can choose to transcend that wiring. You can update the software. You can notice the urge to conform and ask, is this survival or surrender? Part 2. Experiments that exposed us to really understand how deep conformity runs in our psyche. We don't have to rely on theory. We can look at cold hard evidence from some of the most unsettling psychological experiments ever conducted. These studies don't just describe human behavior. They reveal how quickly and easily we abandon our own judgment to fit in. Let's start with a name you may have heard before, Solomon Asch. In the early 1950s, Asch designed a simple visual test. Participants were shown a card with a line on it, followed by another card with 3 lines labeled A, B, and C. The task was simple. Say which of the 3 lines matched the first in length. Now imagine you're sitting in a room with 8 other people. Everyone gives their answer out loud. But here's the twist. The first 7 are all actors, secretly working with the experimenter, and they all give the wrong answer. What do? If you think you'd be brave and choose the correct line anyway, you might want to think again. In Ash's experiment, 75% of participants conformed with the group at least once, knowingly giving the wrong answer just to avoid standing out. Overall, about 1/3 of the responses across all trials were conformist. That's not a small number. That's a statistical slap in the face to our self-image as rational individuals. Why did they conform? Some admitted they didn't want to cause trouble. Others thought maybe the group saw something they missed. But most, in one form or another, feared judgment. They feared being seen as difficult. That fear, not of violence, not of punishment, but of mere social disapproval, was enough to override their senses. If that experiment makes you uncomfortable, let me introduce you to Stanley Milgram. In 1961, just after the trial of Nazi officer Adolf Eichmann, Milgram asked a question that had been haunting the world. How could ordinary people participate in horrific atrocities simply because they were told to? His answer came in the form of an experiment that remains controversial to this day. Participants were told they were helping in a study about memory and learning. They were assigned the role of teacher and instructed to administer electric shocks to a learner every time he gave a wrong answer. The shocks increased in intensity with each mistake. What the participants didn't know was that the learner was an actor and the shocks weren't real. But the screams, those were real enough to the people administering the switches. As the shocks escalated, many participants became visibly distressed. They questioned the experiment. They hesitated. Some even begged to stop. But when the experimenter, a calm man in a lab coat, firmly said, "The experiment requires that you continue," most of them obeyed. In fact, 65% of participants delivered what they believed was a potentially lethal shock of 450 volts. Let that sink in. 2/3 of ordinary people, teachers, engineers, sales clerks, were willing to torture someone simply because an authority figure told them to. They weren't psychopaths. They weren't Nazis. They were your neighbors, your friends, maybe even you. Both Ash and Milgram's experiments paint a chilling portrait. When faced with social pressure or authoritative instruction, our moral compasses start to wobble. We don't suddenly become evil. We become obedient, passive, harmonized to the collective will. The underlying fear isn't always about physical punishment. It's about being that person, the difficult one, the outsider. In Ash's case, participants didn't want to rock the boat. In Milgram's case, they deferred responsibility to the man in the lab coat. In both cases, the decision to conform was less about what was right and more about what felt socially safer. Modern replications of these studies, in various forms and cultural contexts, have yielded disturbingly similar results. We haven't evolved out of this vulnerability. If anything, with the rise of digital culture and algorithmic echo chambers, our susceptibility has deepened. But more on that in the next section. So here's the question. What does this mean for us today? It means that the same forces that led people to silence their senses in a psychology lab still guide us when we scroll social media, sit in Zoom meetings, or hear misinformation at dinner tables. We might not be giving electric shocks, but we're still pressing mental buttons that cause harm. We're still staying quiet when we should speak, still agreeing when we should challenge, still following when we should pause. Because here's the hard truth. Being right doesn't protect you from conformity. Intelligence doesn't immunize you. Education doesn't override the primal craving for approval. What's needed is awareness. The ability to pause and ask, why am I agreeing right now? Is it because I believe this or because I'm afraid not to? Milgram once said, ordinary people can become agents in a terrible destructive process. He wasn't talking about monsters. He was talking about us. And if that doesn't terrify you a little, it should. Part 3. Groupthink in the age of algorithms. Remember when you were told that the internet would make us smarter? That access to unlimited information would lead to enlightenment? Instead, we got something different. Outrage cycles, conspiracy rabbit holes, and a relentless stream of opinions. All shouting, few thinking. But it's not just information overload that's the problem. It's how that information is presented, and more importantly, how we process it together. Welcome to the age of groupthink 2.0, algorithmically optimized, socially rewarded, and mentally exhausting. In this age, the loudest voices don't necessarily have the best arguments. They just know how to go viral. And the scariest part? We listen. We share. We imitate. Not always because we believe, but because we don't want to be left out of the digital conversation. The term groupthink was coined by psychologist Irving Janis in 1972 to describe how cohesive groups can make poor decisions due to the desire for harmony. In groupthink, critical thinking is sacrificed to maintain consensus. Disagreement is seen as disloyalty. Silence becomes virtue. And once a dominant narrative takes hold, it becomes incredibly difficult to challenge. Sound familiar? It should. Today's online spaces amplify groupthink to an entirely new level. Think about how social media platforms are designed. Their business model is built on engagement, on likes, shares, and watch time. The more time you spend, the more ads they serve you. And what keeps you scrolling? Not balanced arguments, not boring nuance, but emotional intensity, tribal affirmation. Algorithms notice what you click, what you pause on, what you respond to. Then they feed you more of it. More of what you already agree with. More of what your friends believe. More of what your chosen tribe finds righteous. Before long, you're not just consuming content, you're bathing in ideological confirmation. And anyone who disagrees, they're not just wrong, they're evil, stupid, or dangerous. This isn't a bug, it's the system working as designed. And what it creates isn't just misinformation, it's conformity disguised as community. A digital culture where questioning your group's beliefs makes you a traitor, and agreeing loudly makes you engaged. This is why online discourse often feels like a battleground. Not because people have thought deeply, but because they've been radicalized by repetition. The echo chamber doesn't teach you how to think. It teaches you what to feel, and it rewards those feelings with dopamine hits of agreement. Consider this. If you've ever hesitated before posting something because it might not sit well with your side, you've felt the pull of digital groupthink. If you've shared something you weren't 100% sure about just because it supported your team's narrative, you've participated in it. We all have. Because participation is easy, dissent is hard. And in the digital age, it's also punished. You might lose followers, you might get harassed, you might be misunderstood, so you stay silent, or worse, you conform. And slowly the boundary between belief and belonging gets blurred. What's more, these echo chambers don't just reinforce ideas, they shape identities. We begin to see ourselves not just as people who believe something, but as people who are something. I am a progressive. I am a patriot. I am a realist. And once belief becomes identity, questioning it feels like self-betrayal. That's how groupthink becomes a psychological prison. It doesn't just keep alternative ideas out, it keeps you in. You start censoring yourself before the algorithm even needs to. You internalize the rules of conformity and enforce them against your own mind. But the real danger isn't just the loss of truth, it's the loss of complexity, of nuance, of the humility to say, I don't know. In a world of binary choices and performative certainty, saying, I'm still thinking, feels almost rebellious. So what can we do? First, we need to become aware of the architecture around us. Understand that social platforms are not neutral arenas. They are carefully engineered to maximize engagement, not enlightenment. Second, we must learn to seek discomfort. Follow voices that challenge us. Pause before reacting. Question even our own conclusions. And most of all, we must remember that truth is rarely loud. It whispers, it complicates, it makes us pause and reframe. Groupthink shouts, it demands loyalty. It punishes hesitation. If you ever feel like your worldview is being reinforced too easily, it's probably time to zoom out. Because in the age of algorithms, staying intellectually honest is a daily act of resistance. And resisting doesn't always mean shouting louder. Sometimes it just means thinking when everyone else has chosen to scroll. Part 4. The comfort of consensus. Let's be honest. Thinking is hard. Doubting is harder. And disagreeing, that can feel like social suicide. In a world where so much of our value is measured by how likable, agreeable, and on brand we appear, conformity doesn't just feel safe, it feels virtuous. There's a strange comfort in consensus. It creates the illusion that we all see the same reality, share the same values, and walk the same path. But that comfort often comes at the cost of truth. Why do we chase consensus? Because we're tired. Emotionally, mentally, existentially tired. It's exhausting to question everything. It's uncomfortable to hold contradictory beliefs. It's socially risky to say, I'm not sure. So instead, we settle. We nod. We agree. We repeat what others say, even if deep down something feels off. Not because we're dishonest, but because we're human. Because harmony feels easier than friction. And so, consensus becomes a kind of sedative. It dulls the edges of doubt. It quiets the urge to challenge. It rewards sameness, not originality. Over time, we start to mistake repetition for truth. The more we hear something, the truer it feels. This is called the illusory truth effect, a psychological bias where repeated statements are more likely to be believed, even when they're false. Propaganda thrives on this. So does advertising. And yes, so does political discourse. When everyone says the same thing, it starts to feel dangerous to say anything else. You might be labeled difficult, toxic, or problematic. But here's the paradox. If everyone's afraid to speak the truth, consensus becomes a cage, one we build for ourselves, one we decorate with slogans and hashtags and good intentions, but still, a cage. This isn't just about politics or online culture. It shows up in families, in workplaces, in friendships. How many times have you held back a thought because you didn't want to make things awkward? How often do we confuse politeness with principle? We trade honesty for harmony and then wonder why we feel so disconnected. The need for consensus also creates an environment where dissent is mistaken for disrespect. Disagreeing with someone's opinion is seen as an attack on their identity. This turns every conversation into a landmine. People stop listening. Dialogue becomes performance, and genuine curiosity, the kind that leads to understanding, vanishes. This is how group consensus begins to rot the foundations of a thinking society. We stop asking questions. We stop entertaining nuance. Everything becomes black or white, right or wrong, us or them. And we find ourselves clinging to ideas not because they're true, but because they make us feel safe. Certainty becomes more attractive than complexity. And the more uncertain we feel about the world, the more desperate we become for consensus to anchor us. But truth doesn't live in the crowd. It lives in the friction between perspectives. It thrives in doubt, in disagreement, in the space where no one's quite sure, but everyone's still listening. That's the kind of consensus worth building. Not one born from pressure or fear, but from shared curiosity. So ask yourself, when was the last time you changed your mind? Not because someone shouted at you or shamed you, but because something made you genuinely think. If it's been a while, maybe it's time to step out of the echo chamber and sit in the discomfort of not knowing. Because in the end, comfort without clarity is just another form of sleep. And the world doesn't need more sleepers. It needs more people willing to wake up, think clearly, and speak gently, even when it's easier to stay silent. Part 5. How to resist the pull. So what now? If conformity is so deeply wired into us, and the systems we live in exploit that wiring so efficiently, do we even stand a chance? The answer isn't simple, but it starts with this. Resistance begins with awareness. You can't fight what you can't see. And most of the time, we don't even realize we're conforming. We just think we're being reasonable, or polite, or staying in our lane. Start by noticing the moments when you agree too quickly. When you nod, not because you believe, but because silence feels safer than truth. When you hit share before you've thought twice. Those micro moments matter. They shape our beliefs, our culture, our future. Conformity doesn't demand a parade, just a quiet series of small surrenders. To resist, we must build what psychologists call intellectual humility. The awareness that our knowledge is always partial, always subject to revision. This isn't about self-doubt, it's about self-respect. A mind that never questions itself is already asleep. The first step is learning to say, I don't know. That phrase is more powerful than it sounds. It's the crack in the wall where real thinking begins. Next, expose yourself to what challenges you, not aggressively, thoughtfully. Read authors you disagree with. Listen to podcasts outside your ideological comfort zone. Ask people how they came to believe what they believe, not to win the argument, but to understand the landscape of their thinking. Not everything you hear will be wise, But if you're only ever hearing echoes of yourself, you're not learning. You're looping. Then, create spaces for dissent. Find or build communities where people are encouraged, not punished, for disagreeing. A real friend doesn't just nod, they push back. A strong team isn't one where everyone agrees, but one where disagreement is welcomed and examined. Disagreement handled with care is a gift. It's how we sharpen our ideas, how we discover nuance, how we uncover what's real. Of course, this all takes time, energy, effort, and in a world that rewards speed and certainty, slowing down can feel counterintuitive. But we need friction, we need discomfort. These are the signs that thinking is happening, that growth is underway. Beware of the path that always feels smooth. It's usually downhill. And don't underestimate the power of a pause. Before you post, before you agree, before you align, pause. Ask, do I believe this or do I just want to belong? That single moment of reflection might not seem revolutionary, but it is. It's the moment you reclaim your mind from the noise. Finally, remember that resistance isn't loud. It's not always dramatic. It can be as quiet as not laughing at a joke that punches down, as small as asking a follow-up question, as subtle as changing your mind publicly and being okay with it. In a world trained to reward automatic agreement and penalize hesitation, choosing to think is a radical act. But it's also a human one. It's what separates us from machines, from mobs, from echo chambers. The ability to say, I see it differently, and here's why. That's the muscle we need to strengthen, not with anger, not with arrogance, but with courage. The courage to be unsure. The courage to ask better questions. The courage to be disliked for the right reasons. Because in the end, the antidote to mass conformity isn't rebellion for its own sake. It's thoughtful independence. It's a mind that's open but not gullible, firm but not rigid, curious even when it's inconvenient. The crowd isn't going anywhere, but neither is your ability to step outside it and choose to think for yourself. Mass conformity isn't a glitch in the system. It is the system, and it thrives when we stop paying attention. Every time we silence ourselves to fit in, every time we choose comfort over clarity, we add one more brick to the walls of our own mental prison. But here's the thing, it doesn't have to be this way. We are not doomed to obey. We are not condemned to echo. We can choose the harder path, the path of curiosity, of courage, of complexity. It won't be easy. Thinking never is. But it is the price of staying human. The world doesn't need more agreement. It needs more thinking. It needs more people willing to be wrong, willing to stand alone, willing to ask uncomfortable questions. Because that is how truth survives, not in the safety of consensus, but in the wilderness of doubt. So the next time you find yourself about to join the crowd, stop. Ask yourself, am I thinking or just following? If this video made you uncomfortable, good. That means you're still thinking. Share it with someone who values truth over trends. Leave a comment with one belief you've recently questioned. Not to shame yourself, but to show you're awake. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more videos that challenge the noise and celebrate the signal. Because in a world that profits from our silence, thinking out loud is a radical act.